I should have known better, as we were scammed twice before our recent cruise. Now I'm going to tell you the stories so that the same thing doesn't happen to you. Hi there, I'm Ilana from the website lifewellcruise.com. Welcome back to my channel. Now, I've talked before about tourist scams that can happen in Caribbean ports or tourist scams that might happen in Europe. And of course, those are not the only places where tourists and travelers can get ripped off. In fact, before our recent cruise, which left out of Miami, Florida, we were unfortunately the victims of a scam twice. Now, don't worry, it wasn't anything major, but I did want to share it with you because we certainly were ripped off, and I admit that in other circumstances, I would have felt pretty vulnerable. Now, it is also my mistake because there is one thing that I could have done in both of these cases to avoid this situation. Now, before I get started, I did want to mention that if you like this video, if you find it helpful, informative, or enjoyable in any way, then please do give this video a big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Let's get started. So a couple of weeks ago, we were heading out on a cruise from Miami Cruise Port. And this is not an airport I typically fly into. I am more accustomed to Fort Lauderdale. Well, when we got our luggage and we were coming out of the airport, well, we saw what looked like a taxi because the gentleman who had a minivan, he was saying, "Taxi, taxi." He was sort of right across the street, but in front of the main door with another taxi, if you will. Now, we were 3 people with quite a bit of luggage, so we did need a minivan or a large car, and we thought that this was exactly what we needed. Well, once we were driving on our way to our hotel in Miami, we did fly in a couple of days early. At some point on the highway, I had noticed that there was no meter on. So I did ask. And before I asked, by the way, I also looked to see if I could see any taxi registration number, any identification. Obviously, this was the wrong time to look. I should have looked before I got into the car. But I realized that there was none of this. When I did ask the taxi driver about that, he told me that there is a flat fee. Instead, I had to ask him how much it was, and it was $50 to our hotel. Now, a quick Google search let me know that probably the price should have been closer to about $22 to $26, but we were now in the car and kind of felt a little bit stuck. Now, before getting in this taxi, I really should have asked how much the fare would be, but I just assumed that there would be a meter, and obviously I assumed wrong. Now, what started going through my head during that taxi ride was really the fact that what if I was by myself? I was with my husband and my son, but honestly, if I was a solo traveler, that would really be probably a bit of a frightening experience, because at least had I used an Uber or a Lyft, I would have had a little bit more security. Now, even though he told us that he can take a credit card, given the fact that he already told me that he was an independent driver, I really wasn't very comfortable using my credit card there, so instead we did pay cash. Now, while I genuinely felt that we were really ripped off in that situation, I know that I should have looked to make sure that his taxi actually had a taxi sign on the roof of his car, or so I thought. So what happened next? You would think that I wouldn't get caught again, but as we were leaving this hotel to go over to our cruise port, so we were in Biscayne Bay area of Miami. After that, we were going to the Miami Cruise Port. It was really just a few minutes away. We asked the staff outside of our hotel if they could get us a taxi. They did, and this time, this taxi looked like a taxi and had a taxi sign on top of his roof. So we thought at least we are getting a regulated taxi, or so we thought. Now, as we were driving to the cruise port, I did ask the taxi driver how long he thought it would take to get there. He told us it's probably somewhere about 10 or 15 minutes because there was like a few minutes of traffic, not very much. And again, about halfway through the drive, I looked and I saw there was a meter, but the meter wasn't turned on. So I asked him about that, and he said, no, I don't turn the meter on. There's a flat fee. So of course I had to ask, what is the flat fee? and he told me it was $35. Now, $35 is not the end of the world, but a quick Google search told me that the price should be somewhere in the range of $12 to $16. Now, again, we were already in the taxi. I didn't want to make a fuss. Probably, maybe I could have paid a little bit less, but I was actually really annoyed because this time I was in what looked like an absolutely legitimate taxi. A taxi driver had an actual meter, but just chose not to turn it on. Now, I should tell you that after our cruise, we did decide to use Uber instead, which I have used before, by the way, and I do use Uber, but sometimes because of the surge pricing or because sometimes Ubers can't get into every airport, there are times that I do use a legitimate taxi. So in any case, when we were at our hotel post-cruise, I was talking to the check-in clerk at the hotel, and this was again in Miami, but in the South Beach area, and we were chatting for just a minute, and she explained to me that the taxis are not regulated in Miami. Now, don't hold me to this. I did try to Google it, and honestly, it's unclear to me. If you know the actual answer, please let me know down in the comments below. But she told me that it is very common to have taxi drivers that are independent, so to speak, taxi drivers that are scamming people. And even when I did Google this before I made this video, I found out that there was a couple that was actually scammed or ripped off by $700. So the amount that I felt that I was overcharged was definitely much less in comparison. For me, it was really a matter of, in particular, the first case, that if you think you're getting into a legitimate taxi where somebody might have a taxi license because they advertise to be a taxi, and if they are not, that could even be somewhat unsafe for travelers. Now, she did tell me that it was actually safer to use Uber or Lyft because this was not something that was very uncommon, unfortunately. And I'm definitely not calling out all taxi drivers. Of course, there are some wonderful taxi drivers, and it really is very unfortunate that these things are happening. And in the case of myself, that they did happen twice during a trip. Again, I think it is my mistake because before I got into the taxi, I should have established what is the fare and are they using a meter if that was the case. Now, please let me know, even if this wasn't in Miami, has anything like this ever happened to you? I know that these videos really do help other people, and we help each other because we all share our stories from when we are traveling. So please let me know down in the comments below. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye for now, and happy cruising.